Good afternoon, and thank you very much, first of all, to the organizers for giving me the chance to present something that is actually quite dear to my heart. It's a research topic that I brought up to Eriksholm about 6 years ago. And it's great to see that the industry and the academic research community is embracing it significantly. But before I get started, I actually would like to show you a small video. So I recently was in the International Hearing Aid Research Conference in California. It happens every second year. It's basically a conference for hearing aid researchers, and there is quite a lot of industry presence in there. And before each session, there was a testimonial video of a hearing aid user trying to motivate a bit the session behind. And here we have a video from Brad Ingrao. He is himself a hearing aid user, but also an audiologist. And he was asked this question. So what is the worst thing about your hearing aids? So please, let's listen to Brad.
As an audiologist who's fit hearing aids for over 30 years, I'd have to say the worst thing about hearing aids is they were designed and tested in places that really don't resemble where most people use hearing aids. The industry really needs to get outside of their marketing bubble, and researchers need to get out into the restaurants, diners, and coffee shops to do their research.
So what do you think? He has a point, right? And I think we do agree that he has a point, and there is a trend of trying to assess even more realistic environments. But I would dare to add something else. We do a lot of assessment in passive listening situations, speech intelligibility measures, and so forth. But actually, we do very few research on actual communication. And we do know that speech communication is actually extremely important for people with hearing loss. And probably I do not need to motivate it in this audience, but nevertheless I'm going to do it because I have some nice data around it. So at Eriksholm, we have a hearing aid clinic. We provide free hearing healthcare to around 300 participants, and in return they participate in research activities that we organize. Every person that comes in, the first thing that we do is we do a cozy questionnaire to try to understand what are those important situations that they would like their hearing aids to help the most. So I assume that you are familiarized with the cozy questionnaire, but you may not be very familiarized with the common sound scenarios. So basically, those are everyday situations that you will face. So when you go around, you may face some speech communications with either 2 people, 3 people. You may have a focused listening situations as right now. Those that don't understand English well, they will have it through some kind of live media translation and so on. But basically, it's just a way to make a taxonomy of the situations that you may face, right? So basically what we did at Eriksholm, we got data from 83 test participants, the cozy questionnaires, and then we tried to map it here in these common sound scenarios, something that the scientific community actually uses to understand the communication needs. We expanded it a bit. So for example, we could have speech communication in quiet or in noise, just to get a bit more of richness in the data. And these are basically the occurrences. So what I want to highlight here is, first of all, speech communication is by far the most occurring situation that people score in their COSLI questionnaire, so they do care about speech communication. Something that I did not foresee was that I thought that, like we always are concerned about noisy environments, but they are also concerned about quiet situations. They would like their hearing aids to help them even more in communications in quiet. So this is just to show that speech communication is actually extremely important for persons with hearing loss. And how do we study speech communication? So I actually have another video. This is a silent video. I'm going to talk over you, just to show you a bit the experimental setup. So this is one of our experiments that we ran at Ericsson, and we just recorded just to show how does it look like. But basically, we feed the participant with a microphone, that the one that I have. We can monitor speech. We put some fancy glasses to monitor eye gaze. If you notice those glasses, they have some markers, so we can track the motion of the head. And then we basically calibrate the system, and it's quite inintrusive. It looks like it's very intrusive, but it's actually quite okay. And we usually communicate with a loudspeaker array. We can add noise, different types of noise, different types of maskers, and then we make them communicate. We can do this in many different ways. Here we just trigger a conversational task using a well-known diapix task. They have to just basically find the difference between two nearly identical pictures. If you notice on her hand, she has a smartwatch. It's not a smartwatch, it's a medical-grade device that can monitor skin conductance, heart rate variability, and many more. And we always ask subjective ratings, how hard it was, how easy it was, did you put a lot of effort, did you feel successful in the communication? So that's a bit the setup that we have. And just to put this a bit into a systematic evaluation, so which measures are we interested on looking? We look at speech production measures. That will be like, how loud do I speak? Do I try to modulate my speech a bit more to make myself understand, and so on and so forth? We also look a lot in conversational turn-taking. This is a dynamic measure of a conversation. I will delve a bit more into this later. We also look at behavioral measures. So that's basically head orientation, gaze, where people look, how do they behave in general under communication situations. We also look at physiological responses. So that's things like pupillometry, but as well like heart rate variability, skin conductance, greatly speaking, autonomous nervous system activity that tell us something about our stress. And likewise, subjective reports. So we always ask individuals how did it feel, because I think that's also important. And how do we modulate difficulty? For example, how do we make a conversation easier or harder? How do we do it in our industry? We add noise to everything we can, right? So that's one way. We can have conversation in quiet, we can have conversations in noise, but we also modify the hearing aid support. We have hearing impaired participants talking in quiet without hearing aids, or hearing impaired participants talking with hearing aids with low noise reduction, with high noise reduction, and then we can assess if there are significant changes. And in terms of the conversational task, we a lot of the times use free conversational task, but sometimes somebody takes over the flow and just keeps speaking all the time, and then you don't see very interesting things. So other times we go for some kind of task, like the one that I just described before. And last but not least, we also modify the number of people that you communicate with. So we've been doing a lot of work in dyads at Ericsson, but in other research centers, they've done conversation in triads and in quartets. And the largest that I've seen so far is something that the Technical University is doing right now with a group of 10 people, where you have like several conversations going on at the same time. And what do we know so far? So first, let's look at speech production measures, right? This is a bit of a good sanity check. This is some data from ourselves, a study that we did, where we had 24 normal hearing talking to 24 hearing impaired participants. We basically had people conversing under different noise levels, in quiet, noise 60, noise 70. And the first thing that we did was to look at the speech level, voice level. Let me guide you through the plot. Basically, we have hearing impaired data here on the left, normal hearing data here on the right, and what we see is that a different noise level. So what do we see? That people speak louder with increased background noise. No wonder there is the lumbar effect that kicks in. Nevertheless, there is a good sanity check to have. Basically, people are just trying to keep a positive SNR in the conversation to whatever extent they can to make themselves understandable. But the funny thing is that they also modulate speech quite a lot. So here we have, for example, the first 4-month frequency. Again, hearing impaired data in here, normal hearing data in here, and we see that in quiet, the first 4-month frequency is lower than, for example, in noise 70, and the same applies for the normal hearing. And we see this, that the hearing impaired tend to have a higher modulation of first form and frequency than the normal hearing. This has been seen. And just to show that this is not only us in our study, we've been doing our due diligence, looking at papers out there, and what do we see? That when we increase the noise, all the papers report that speech level increases, and those papers that look at first form and frequency modulations, they also see that people also modulate speech. And what about turn-taking measures? I think this is very interesting. Let me just try to guide you. So here I have myself and Martha, and I can see, can you see something here? Maybe not really. But basically, when we have turn-taking, for example, I speak for a while, and then I take a small pause, then I speak a bit longer, and then here, there should be Martha, my colleague, starts speaking a bit. So we basically have a bit of a, let's see if we see it a bit better this way. Right? Good. Basically, we see a bit of turn-taking, right? So I speak, Martha speaks, I transition to Martha, Martha speaks for a bit, I interrupt her because I'm a bit rude, and then so on and so forth. What we look, for example, in terms of turn-taking in a communicational context is, for example, do we change the way that we speak, for example, as an effect of noise? So this is some data from Lauren Hadley in the University of Nottingham, and let me guide you through this. So she looks at the utterance duration. That will be like not a turn, but this one. I speak, take a gap, I speak a bit more. So she sees how long I speak for. In dyads and in triads. So this is when you have two people talking to each other and three people talking to each other as a function of noise. And what do we see? First of all, that in triadic conversations, people speak longer, and she attributes this for the fact of when I'm competing with two other people to talk with, once I have the floor, I'm going to say what I have to say. But when you have dyadic conversation, it's easier to regain the flow because you only have one other interlocutor. And what we see as well is that with increasing noise, we try to convey less information at a time and probably more relevant information for the conversation. So you speak less. And there is also another aspect that we look very closely. There is the floor transfer offset. So when we have a transition, there is a gap in between I stop speaking and Martha starts speaking again. So let me guide you through this. So basically what we plot here is this gap. How long is this gap? And what we have here is in blue, normal hearing data as noise is increased. What we see is that when we increase the noise, this gap between I stop speaking and Martha starts speaking gets usually longer because I have a harder time predicting when is Martha gonna finish talking. It's just harder. And not only the median value, but also the variability. So if I would have a conversation of 10 minutes, if I look at all the floor transfers, all the ways that I pass the floor to Martha, it's going to be very hard to predict because sometimes I'm going to be very close and even overlap with her. I mean, we have all been in a party where it's so noisy. Then at some point in time, you just speak over each other because you can just simply not guess when the turn is over. And again, as before, just to show that we actually have some literature surveying here, and there are mixed findings on the utterance duration, but there are very strong findings on this floor transfer offset across studies. When you increase noise, the floor transfer, the turn-taking prediction gets very complicated. And now I'm going to speed up a bit and add a bit more of the facts. Behavioral measures. What do I mean by behavioral measures? For example, gaze. So big disclaimer, this is normal hearing data, so that's a study from Lauren Hadley. I would expect something different in hearing impaired data, but basically, nevertheless, it's interesting the study that she did. She basically had two people talking to each other, and they look, where do they actually look when they are talking as a function of noise? Do they look at the eyes region or the mouth region? And that's what she put here, basically the mouth region and the eyes region. And what do you see is that usually people tend to look at the eyes when it's in quiet, because it's a very good place that you can get reactions. Does she like me? Is she understanding what I said? But as noise gets harder, as you increase noise, people start looking at the mouth. Lip reading helps. And people also move closer to each other. Even though all these studies, you have people actually sitting to each other, at some point in time they are like leaning forward all the way, as much as they can, because they get a better SNR. That makes sense. But people actually do not turn the ear to hear. What do I mean by that? They don't do this. This is normal hearing people, keep in mind. But maybe the benefit that they get from the lip reading is higher than the SNR level, and it's actually a bit unpolite. If I would be giving all my lecture like this, you would be a bit annoyed at some point. But we do see this interpersonal distance all over the papers that we've checked, and also like people change where they look based on noise. And what about physiological responses? You may have seen pupillometry studies talking about listening effort and so forth. So we actually were first movers here on looking at pupillometry in a real conversation, which is super unconstrained. And we were surprised to see. I just wanted to see you two things. So look at the black line. This is the pupil dilation at 70 dB with noise. Look at this gray line here. This is with in quiet conditions. So when you were actually conversing at higher noise level, you had a significantly larger pupil dilation, potentially indicating a larger effort. But we also saw this, for example, in the heart rate variability. We had these very fancy medical-graded smartwatches that could tell us something about the heart rate variability. We look at the high frequency value of the heart rate variability, and what did we see? For example, that basically in quiet conditions, people are exerting less effort than in higher conditions. And the same happens. People with hearing impairment, they were talking to a normal hearing person all the time. These conversations were more stressful. They had to put more energy in communicating than the normal hearing people. And what about subjective reports? Because that's something that we always do. And some researchers still wonder why we do it. Let me put some words into here. Basically, we always ask something like, how much effort did it take you to follow the conversation? And then, for example, here we have the normal hearing data, the hearing impaired data, right? And then we had basically in 3 noise conditions, 70, 60 degrees, and in quiet. And if you look at this, you see, like, for example, okay, the yellow line is more effort than the blue line in quiet. That makes sense. But let's look at back down here. I just want you to reflect 1 second. Basically, we had people conversing without a hearing aid. So hearing impaired persons talking at 70 dB without a hearing aid. And then we put actually the hearing aid. So look at how they reply. If you look at the unaided condition at 70 dB, so here they are talking at 70 dB without the hearing aid, and in here they are talking at 70 dB with the hearing aids, with noise reduction, and there is not a big difference on the subjective reports. Maybe we're asking the wrong questions, but then when you look out, I'm just going to pick on a study from Elina Bock-Pedersen from WSA. I just want you to focus on here. Basically, the red data is for the hearing impaired, and you have people unaided, unaided. She does see a bit of a bigger difference. But basically, what we're seeing is that it's hard for us from the scientific community to get meaningful information on how hard the communication was by subjective reports alone. So what can we do instead? And then we need to look a bit far away, in Australia, in Maguire University, where Jörg Buchholz and Kelly Miles have been doing some research on conversation breakdowns. I mean, you have all experienced a conversation breakdown. You are having a conversation, and then out of a sudden, you don't get it. Sorry, could you repeat that? That will be just a conversation breakdown. And what they do is they basically did this very nice study with 24 pairs. Again, normal hearing people talking to normal hearing people, and their different noise levels. And they sort of found a sweet spot. So when you're conversing at low background noise levels, 50, 60, there are relatively few conversation breakdowns. But when you hit this magic threshold of 78 dB and above, the conversation breakdowns grow exponentially. So basically, this is for normal hearing participants. So right now we're going to start a project with them, trying to do the same with hearing impaired participants, where I would expect that we will see the breakdown a bit earlier in the process, but maybe when we aid them, they get back to that. But we're trying to explore whether this kind of measure is useful to assess how difficult it is. All right. So now we know, I did a bit of a very quick state-of-the-art review. So what about audiological applications? Where do I see this impacting the industry? And I think one could claim that we're already seeing some things. So one side effect of studying conversation behavior is that you get a very good understanding on how people behave under different communication situations. So I think that one obvious thing that we will see is a bit more of a streamlined integration of the hearing aid signal processing using this natural behavior. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that imagine, I'm going to put a very silly example. When you have only one person talking to you, it's very likely that this person is sitting in front. How much in front? Roughly 3 degrees. When you have two persons in front of you, I mean, unless you don't really like one person, you're going to try to put yourself more or less in the middle, and then you're going to have them usually around 18, plus minus 18 degrees. And you could try to use this type of information as an advantage on your hearing aid signal processing. But what I think, and that's the full reason why I'm doing this, what I'm proposing to do research on this area, is that I believe that we could use the experience communication difficulty as a personalization metric. So the main motivation that I have behind doing this research is that we could potentially derive an outcome measure that reflects communication difficulty in people with hearing impairment that is both sensitive to the type of hearing loss that they have, as well as the type of signal processing. So just to put it very simple, before we had these two people talking to each other with a lot of sensors, and maybe what I could find out is that they are having a hard time understanding the conversation. And then when I put a hearing aid, basically I condense all this information into something very simple and saying like, okay, right now, he's actually having an easier time. That's what we're trying to do. And we could use this in the rehabilitation setting. So imagine that you use this in hearing aid rehabilitation. If you can log experience difficulty, maybe what you could do is to have to break different periods of time, and you say like, look, this person in here is communicating 40% of the time, whatever, but most of this time is always having a hard time. Let's try something different. Let's put a different program. And then we see that over time, the hard time proportion gets lower. Or in the hearing aid automatics, if you have a way to measure the in-the-moment experience difficulty, you could actually use this to adapt the hearing aid signal processing based on that information. Because some people may even struggle, as I showed you before, in relatively simple one-to-one conversations in quiet. Why shouldn't you provide them more help in here if you had such a marker of experience difficulty? So this is as much as I wanted to cover today, and I would actually be very happy to take any question that may just be on the top of your mind.
Thank you for your presentation.